We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And I didn't watch anything this week. I really did. I was trying to think. I'm like, I must have watched something. I really didn't. But I wanted to ask Tom, did you order a new TV? Because I texted you about possibly ordering a new TV.
It's no good time for me to broach the subject of a $2,500 to $2,800 TV, even though that is a great price.
Yes, it is a great price. We're talking about the Samsung QN90A. So that is the 2021 model, now being replaced by the QN90B. And it was down to $3,000 for the 85-inch QN90A, which I already thought was a great price. And I had texted Tom about previously. And then it went down another $200 to $2,800. So I was like, ooh, because Tom talked about, I think you told your wife, between $3,000 and $8,000 because you were thinking of that 98-inch TCL that cost $8,000. And I was like, hey, this is below everything you mentioned. And it's 85 inches. And it's as close to an OLED as an LCD gets, really. So I was like, hey, exciting. Tom didn't buy it.
Yeah, I didn't buy it. We're planning a vacation.
Yes.
My son's graduating from high school and going to college very soon. And I have two other children that need to be fed upon occasion. So there will be a day when I will be able to buy a TV like that. But people are always surprised when you buy stuff. I'm like, yeah, I buy stuff. I mean, I know it just because you work for a website or you do a podcast and you review stuff doesn't mean that it just falls from the sky whenever you need it, and second, that they let you keep it. That's not the way that works, especially not with TVs.
Yeah.
TVs.
Well, I mean, if you're one of the quite well-known TV reviewers, you would always have at least one TV on hand because you just constantly cycle through them. But
you just sit on that review for a little bit longer.
That's right.
That's what you do. Well, I'll get it back to you when I get it back to you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's not how that works.
Okay.
Yes, I buy things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
People are surprised. Like Christmas comes around, my kids don't want hand-me-down electronics that I
have already been used and tested.
I've used and tested. They don't care. They know what I've got, and they're like they want something that is theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to go out and buy electronics for them. That is true. That I'm supposed to be getting a little Bluetooth speaker in to review, and it's the update to a Bluetooth speaker I bought my son for Christmas last year.
Right.
And I told the guy that, and he's like, "You actually buy electronics? I can't believe it." I'm like, I don't know how you think these things work. But yes, I am still recovering from the weekend. My son had on Friday
How did this crazy drive go? I need to hear about.
Yes. Okay. The track meet. So he had a track meet. It was a state track meet for pole vault. He was supposed to start at 3:00. He just started about 3:30, and then he got one vault in before there was a lightning delay.
Oh, okay.
For 4 hours. So he didn't really start vaulting till 8 p.m. Then he finished around 8:30 and 9 o'clock, and then we got in the car, and this was from Gainesville, Florida, because we were at the University of Florida, which is where the state meet was being held. And we drove from there to North Carolina to a climbing gym, because at 7 a.m. the next morning, he needed to check in for a climbing competition.
7 a.m. So you had to go through Georgia?
I went through Georgia and South Carolina.
There you go, yeah.
and half of Florida.
Yeah.
So, yes, it was, we got there at 3:30 a.m.
Okay. Yeah, you made good time.
And
well, I guess there wasn't a whole lot of traffic after midnight.
There wasn't a whole lot of traffic. Yeah. There was, by the end, I was starting to hallucinate just a little bit. Like, not like seeing monsters or anything, but just like, is there something, shadows start moving on me a little bit. But we got there at 3:30. I slept for about 2.5 hours. He did the competition. We had lunch. We got back in the car. I drove back, and we got back.
I mean, I can't imagine that was peak performance for him either. That's not exactly.
He slept the entire way. I don't want to hear any complaints out of him.
Moving car. That's not quite the same as a truly.
That boy
restful...
could sleep. he falls asleep just thinking about falling asleep. That boy was about as well rested as he could. He did say afterwards, he's like, I was a little sore from the pole vaulting,
right,
and I probably could have climbed a little bit better,
right,
if I wasn't quite so sore. I'm like, fair enough, but he didn't. He climbed just fine. He pole vaulted just fine. It's his first time at states. This is his first time at divisionals for climbing. The next step up from where he was nationals. Like he was one stage below nationals. So he had a really good sports season. So very proud of him. Did a great job.
Awesome.
So there's a lot going on right now, and none of it involves buying a $2,800 television, unfortunately.
Yes, and some of our listeners will be relieved because they'd be very disappointed if you ever replaced your projector with a flat panel television. But that's the way we're.
Why would they be?
You know who we're talking about.
Oh, well, I don't care. I don't want to guess because there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yes, and I did watch stuff. I've been watching Agent Carter, which is way better than I thought it was going to be.
Agent Carter was great. There was sadly only 2 seasons of them and not super long seasons, but yeah, it was great.
Yeah. I'm liking it. I like her just in general. After seeing Luke Cage, and I'm just going to say this as somebody who does like that actor.
Yes.
And he could not carry that series. He just was not, in my mind, he wasn't capable. He didn't have the acting chops or the charisma or the gravitas or whatever it takes to carry that season. He just couldn't do it. And maybe it was a directing. I'm not blaming him personally, but that character did not work for me. I loved him in Jessica Jones. I kind of didn't like him all that much in Luke Cage, even though it was decent. It was decent, but she absolutely just muscles that thing through.
Right.
She is phenomenal. I mean, when she's on the screen, you look at her and nothing else.
Haley Atwell.
She's great.
Yeah.
So I'm really liking it. I'm also on to the second season of Mythic Quest.
Oh wow, you went through quick.
They're only half an hour each,
long,
and I didn't cycle that this whole weekend, so I was able to sit and watch a little bit more TV. So yeah, I'm liking that as well.
Well, that means you did see A Dark Quiet Death. And what did you think of A Dark Quiet Death? Because I love that episode so darn much.
Well, I liked it.
Okay.
I mean, again, whenever you build something up for me, it better be phenomenal. I thought it was interesting. It was good, and I liked the fact that they had the completely different characters, and then you start seeing it woven into, like, people are wearing the T-shirt,
just a little
and
bit.
then you start seeing it woven into the story afterwards. The one that I thought was really well done was the one pandemic one, where they're
I guess that was season 1, or it was kind of like in between season 1 and 2 or something. I guess that's
well,
right.
maybe. Yeah. I don't really know, but because I'm just watching them sequentially. But that one I thought was
yes, I agree.
I thought it nailed it.
Yeah.
It nailed exactly the feelings that a lot of people had at different, and everybody was dealing with it kind of differently.
Yeah.
So I thought that one really got me. Yeah. That one I thought was great. But the problem I have with the series as a whole, if anybody cares, which I know you don't, is it's by the creators of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is Charlie Day and Rob McElhenney. There's no good characters in that show, right? There's no hero to root for in that show. And this one kind of tries to make Poppy be the hero, but she's kind of not the hero either.
Well, they do. She's got an arc. She is an interesting character to watch because she has an arc.
She is, but it doesn't, at least at this point, for me, it feels very... I'm like, oh, you guys are all kind of jerks. Like, I mean, every one of you.
The 2 women who start out as game testers through season 1.
They're my favorite right now.
They're quite nice people. It's like, they're not flawless. They make mistakes, but they're certainly not evil.
Sure, they are the most interesting characters. At least for me, they're the ones I like watching the most right now. And of course, I do like the assistant girl, whatever her name is, and the guy from Community. They're just chewing up the scenery, being evil.
They're being absolutely horrible. Ridiculous.
Well, Well, and that's when you're looking around the series trying to find somebody to root for. You're like, oh, I like Poppy's the hero. I love Poppy, and then Poppy goes and just absolutely dumps all over the programmers or the art department. And
there's so many people who have no idea what we're talking about because Mythic Quest is not a widely watched show. It's on Apple TV Plus, which is another reason.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
We won't have to talk about this. I'm sorry.
But no, that's quite all right. I love the show, so I'm happy to talk about it. But yes, just to hype it up and ruin it for you in season 2, there's another episode somewhat like A Dark Quiet Death where it's like,
you told me that already. Yeah.
Which is another one of my favorites, and it's kind of a two-parter. So fantastic stuff! Yay!
Let's get to this podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your question answered, all you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You go to avrant.com, find our old episodes there. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant. You can contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His Twitter is @FirstReflect. Take a breath. And I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is @avrant_Tom. All right, let's get to the listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, support the podcast in some way. If you can financially and would like to, go to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. It will take you to a PayPal donation site where Aras, for 3 weeks running, has been donating every week. So we've been helping him, and he's been thanking us. And I can't say I can't say how much I appreciate it, because I appreciate it a whole lot. So thank you very much, Aras.
Yes, thank you, Aras. That's great. Thank you so much for the PayPal donations with an S on the end, because that's certainly been the case. Although
he's got the high score as far as I can remember. I don't remember anybody ever.
I'm pretty darn sure. And we've had our trifecta donor who did all 3.
Oh, who did do all 3, right? Yeah, we did do that. So that's good. We also have 143 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's subscription service where you sign up to become a contributing listener to our podcast every month. Patreon will take some money from you, a minimum of $1, and give most of it to us. So thank you to our 143 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast.
That's it. Patreon.com/AVRant podcast. That's the place to go if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. You choose the amount, and it happens every month until your credit card expires, or you forget, or you decide not to sign up anymore.
Those are all possibilities.
143 people have signed up for automatic donations, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going during whatever end of the world scenario that's happening this week.
Yeah, the news every day, just so cheery, so cheerful. Watching the news every day.
It was a different world when I was growing up, and there was 2 ways of getting the news. You had your local news stations, which there was three whopping channels of it. And then there was the newspaper. And you could, if you were like me, the only thing the newspaper was good for when I was a kid was comics.
Right.
And then the rest of it you threw away. And then I didn't watch the news, so, and then whatever they could report in the hour is what you got. So there just wasn't as much. Like, it had to be like a super big thing in order for it to make that news, because they were also had to fit in all the local stuff too, because the local stuff is actually what's important to the people who are watching. Nowadays, with 24-hour news cycles, they're like, anything that could possibly maybe be news is now news, and we're going to report on it as such, which is where we get all these fake TikTok challenge things that nobody seems to understand where they came from. And my favorite is the MCU fans revolt against, and I'm like, I have literally never, I am a MCU fan. I'm actually a DCU fan too. It's just that all the movies suck. But I am an MCU fan, and I am never heard of what you're talking about, which means it's like 2 guys on Reddit. All right. So stop reporting it as such. But yes. Lots of bad things. So thank you, Jay. Thank you, Art, who are part of our 2 Hour Plus Club, as well as Dan for sending us notes of gratitude. At this point, I forgot. I don't know how I get off on these things. I'm sorry, guys. I apologize. I am a bad podcast host. I am doing poorly today. I promise to do better next time.
I promise nothing, because I am a little down in the dumps. I'm trying not to, but it's just, oh man. But to Jay and Art and Dan, and honestly to multiple other people as well, because of course stuff comes in on Twitter and Facebook and that I don't really gather up and mention on the podcast anymore. I just go by what comes in via email. So we very much appreciate the notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going and the notes of encouragement. It's all very nice to have, and it reminds us why we do this. So thank you all so much, and thank you to everybody who keeps on listening and sending in your questions.
That's right. Right. Okay. News. Mm-hmm. In the biggest non-news story in the AV world that has happened in recent times.
Sent a scare if all you did was read the headline and look at the picture.
Flash across everybody's news feeds from multiple sources except for AV Gadgets, because I read it and went, this isn't news. I'm not going to write anything about this. And everybody else did. Onkyo Corporation of Japan has filed for bankruptcy. Oh my God, I'll not get any more support for my Onkyo receiver that I haven't even bought yet because it's on back order. Relax. Calm down. They're ceasing their operations. President and CEO Toro Hayashi issued an apology to business partners and shareholders, saying their efforts to maintain business on a smaller scale was unsuccessful, and that the persistent global chip shortage has prevented them from scaling their OEM manufacturing and preventing them from introducing new products. It is the end of a company dating back to 1946. Well, Onkyo was my first receiver, and it was also my second receiver, and it may have been on my third receiver as well, to be honest with you. So I do love Onkyo. But the Onkyo Integra and Pioneer audio video products we often talk about on this podcast will live on. Vox International, the parent company of Klipsch and Yamaha, partnered with Sharp Manufacturing last year to purchase the entire home entertainment AV division of Onkyo. We reported that here. So none of that is going away, despite many, 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 many news sites using an image of Onkyo AV receiver when they published their bankruptcy news. It was clickbait, and it sucked, and I refuse to do it.
Well, I think some of it was just genuine not understanding. I mean, if you just Google Onkyo, then one of the first things that's going to pop up is an image of an AV receiver. So I think a lot of people who were just reporting the news, understandably.
I'm sorry, you have more of an obligation to understand what you're writing, in my mind. But anyway, so yes, that stuff was sold. So in order to try to slim down Onkyo so that the company itself could go on, they sold off different branches of their business to pare down. And one of them they sold off was the whole AV unit that went off a couple of years ago.
Well,
I think now.
I mean, they tried to sell all of Onkyo, debt and all, and the whole kit and caboodle to Sound United. That deal fell through. That never happened. So that was, I think, 3 years ago at this point. Then the Vox International and Sharp. So Vox International owns 75%, Sharp owns 25%, and they put it all under a wholly owned subsidiary called Premium Audio Products, or Premium Audio Company, something like that. Anyway, that's a wholly owned subsidiary by Vox International, and then 25% of that is Sharp Manufacturing. So, that sale completed in September of 2021. So not quite a year has gone by, but that whole division was sold off. I'll be honest with you, I don't know whatever happened to Gibson Guitars. That was owned Onkyo at one point. I don't know when or how all of that got divested, or what was kept by whom, because at one point Onkyo was owned by Gibson Guitars. So
that is true.
They've been going along in weird financial things behind the scenes for quite a long while now. This is a little bit similar to like how Sennheiser headphones are now owned by Sonova, medical equipment, but there's still a Sennheiser corporation that does other OEM stuff, but just doesn't do consumer headphones anymore. So That this is the type of business stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Onkyo Corporation of Japan was more or less business to business. They were doing internal audio components. They were doing components for automotive products and stuff like that. That was a lot of what they were focusing on. So yeah, that's going away. That's bankrupt and ceasing operations. I don't know. I'm not going to go so far as to say that this will have zero impact on Onkyo, Integra, and Pioneer AV receivers, because some of those internal audio components might have been being manufactured by Onkyo Corporation in Japan. That's not out of the realm of possibility. In fact, it seems quite likely to me. So there might be an impact of some sort. But that's speculation on my part. I really don't know.
We'll see. I mean, at the very least, you don't have to worry about the stuff that they're currently making. They're still
well, you definitely don't because you can't buy any of it. It's all out of stock.
Yeah. There you go. There's more people like, I don't understand how somebody can go out of business and not, and their stuff be so. I'm like, yeah, that's one itty bitty part of a massive business,
right.
and it doesn't even owned by the same company anymore. All right, after HD TV test, Ertings and AV forums all posted reviews saying that Samsung's new S95B QD-OLED TVs were apparently detecting common window size test patterns to deliver accurate measurements with those specific patterns, but overbrightened, oversaturated results with anything else. Anyways, now Vincent T.O. has tweeted that Samsung contacted him to say that they would issue a firmware update to ensure consistent brightness of HDR content across a wider range of window sizes, at least in filmmaker mode. Like, oops, we got caught with our hand in the cookie jar,
Yep.
and we gonna fix it with a firmware update.
Yes, indeed.
I did write an article last week. It hasn't published yet, but I did write an article last week. Said that's basically the title is something along the lines of no more waiting for firmware updates. Just say no to firmware updates or something like that, because holy moly, this, and I really bag on Yamaha, but because they are the ones that really
recently
did it
in
the
mind,
worst.
yes.
Yeah, but it has been, I mean,
well,
it's
Sony too. Those 4K 120 and VRR updates that people waited on when they bought the 4K 120 televisions that Sony was selling. Like, that took a long time for those VRR updates to arrive, and when they did, they were not perfect by any stretch.
And my article isn't really saying that we should boycott any one specific manufacturer or anything else. It's just, if a product doesn't have a capability, but they say it will, don't buy it until it does.
Yeah. Well, like when Vincent tweeted this, people replied, they're like, yeah, I've got a 2019 Samsung that I'm still waiting on the eARC update that has, that firmware has never come. So, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah. It's very easy for them to say we're going to fix it through.
Sure.
Fix it. Basically, we're going to fix it in post. We're going to fix it. It's very easy to say that, and then they send it down to the engineering department, who are scratching their heads, going, "Really? How do you have some insight on this that we don't?"
This one definitely should be fixable, because
one would think
this is a lookup table in the service menu that just needs
very
to have
much feels like something they purposely broke.
Yes,
now they're just trying to unbreak it.
Judging by all the comparison videos, because the best way to evaluate a TV is to have someone record it with their phone with two TVs side by side and then post it on YouTube in standard dynamic range. That is the ultimate way, and then you watch it on your phone. Of course, you can pick out every difference between two televisions with them compared head to head like that. But judging by the exceedingly positive response of all of the influencers and people who do those type of TV comparisons on YouTube and on forums and that as well, where they're saying, look at this Quantum.OLED right next to an LG C1, and everyone was praising the LG C1, but look at this Quantum.OLED, look at that red, look at that yellow and orange. They're like, there's so much more yellow and orange than they are on the LG OLED. The whole image is brighter. Like, that's what we were promised with Quantum.OLED. It's going to take OLED that we already have, and it's going to make it brighter, and it's going to make the colors so much better, and it's true. Just look at them side by side on your tiny little screen. And it's like, well, Samsung got it right, didn't they, as far as those people are concerned? People don't want accuracy. They don't want to sit in a pitch black room with 100 nits for standard dynamic range. They want to have their retinas seared out and their minds blown by the unbelievable colors. So, I mean, why change anything? It's not like it's going to cost them sales. It's going to cost them like 2 sales from the people who listen to Vincent Tio and us and actually want accuracy. So, yeah. Good times.
Yeah. KEF has unveiled their new LS60 Wireless Tower speakers, expected to ship in June. Tom, has a full write-up over AV Gadgets. And LS60 Wireless is the name of them. That is their name, like the uppercase W. I called them tower speakers because it's more descriptive, but that's not part of their name. So anyways, you can look it up over there. KEF is combining a bunch of their recent technology developments with within the LS60. It's got the UniQ driver and metamaterial rear absorption of the LS50 meta, using a 3/4-inch tweeter and a 4-inch mid-range concentric driver. Powering the mid-range and tweeter are separate 100-watt each Class D and Class AB amplifiers, respectively, similar to the LS60 Wireless 2 bookshelf speakers. Now, if you go and you look at my write-up, and I am actually very upset about this, okay? If you go and look at my write-up, it is all based on press releases that they sent me before the actual... So all I had to go on was what was in this press release. And therefore, it says in my press release that they have like 1,000 watts of power or something like that, right? Or 1,400 watts of power. Because that's all they told. They didn't tell me anything about the amps. They didn't tell me anything else. And then the day they came out, I pressed go on the publish on the article, and then they released their webpage. And the web page has all this additional information that I wish I would have had beforehand. I may just stop
a little more granular.
Yeah, I may just stop using those things because this has got more information than that is in my article, and it's not my fault. I just didn't have it available when I was writing it. So the powering the mid-range and tweeter are separate 100-watt for each one, Class D and Class AB amplifiers, respectively, similar to the LS60 Wireless 2 bookshelf speakers. Naturally, being part of KEF's wireless series, they've got the same built-in streaming services along with AirPlay 2, Chromecast, Rune, and Bluetooth. You also find the eARC HDMI port, which is kind of silly, but whatever. Optical, digital, coax inputs, along with RCA inputs, a subwoofer output on each of the towers, and Ethernet and Wi-Fi connections. 4 5.25-inch drivers are arranged, 2 on each side of the tower, using KEF's Unicore force-canceling subwoofer technology, which just means the woofers are backed against each other. 500-watt Class D amp powers those with a -3 extension spec down to about 31 hertz. Those sideband woofers plus the plinth on the bottom are all reminiscent of KEF's Blade flagship towers. Yes. These things are all true. That the towers themselves can be hardwired to each other with what looks to be an Ethernet cable, but it's not exactly sure.
Yeah, because
or
the
you
back
can
of
wirelessly
one of them has all of the inputs.
Right.
And then there are still ports on the second tower, but that's to connect to the first tower and then have a subwoofer output jack. And it looks like it's also got a USB port on there for something or other, but yeah.
I think it's just for firmware updates. But though they can connect wirelessly, you can connect the two towers to each other wirelessly as well. You do not have to connect them physically. You can, and it's a higher bit rate connection, but they can connect wirelessly. The price is $7,000 per pair. The bookshelf LS60 Wireless 2 are priced at $2,800 per pair, so the additional cabinet size and those Unicore woofers are definitely adding considerably to the price. There are 3 finish options, none of which are black. They got gray, white, or blue. So titanium gray, mineral white, or royal blue. And I guess a blue is coming later in August.
Yep.
And that's what you got. And we were talking a little bit about this beforehand, but we're trying to figure out what's the competition. Like when you say that $7,000 seems like a lot of money for a pair of power tower speakers. It's not cheap, but it's certainly a heck of a lot less expensive than some of the other flagship stuff that they sell.
Sure.
And it's already powered. They got their amps built in, and if you're looking for like more output, good sound, and not having to have a receiver, like literally just basically a really nice 2-channel soundbar less setup for your TV, these seem like a pretty good option to me. And the only thing that we could come up with beforehand was what Bang & Olufsen has some floor standing speakers that are powered as well, but I can't really think of anything else.
We thought of speakers that you plug in, Golden Ear,
right?
Martin Logan, but those ones, it's to power like the bass drivers, or like in the case of Martin Logan, it's to power up the stators in the electromagnetic panel, but they're not actually fully self-powered, self-contained speakers where like you still have to connect them to a source. They don't just have a wireless source of their own like these KEF LS60s do.
Right.
Because, I mean, you could set up these KEF LS60s with literally nothing else and still listen to music.
It could be the only thing in your room except for a chair, and you could still stream
your phone.
Stuff to it.
You'd need your phone to control
You need your phone.
But, So it's a fully self-contained audio system that comes in tower form factor. You don't need to have speaker stands. It's using that Unicore subwoofer technology that they've got for their teeny tiny little, dual opposed subwoofers that they have now. So they're borrowing that technology to give you some pretty decent bass extension. You're still going to be dependent on where you position them in the room as far as what the actual bass response is going to be. And I love their, of course, press photos where it's like, yeah, that's the hardest, flattest, most reflective room. And they're pushed right up against the wall. And there you see them. But I don't know what the bass response is going to be like inside that room. But, that's the sort of thing they're envisioning.
Yeah, I actually think this price point is pretty good. And the reason I think so is because of who I think the target audience is. Yeah, and what to me the target audience is the people who are looking at those blades and the reference line, whatever their high end line is. I can't remember what it's called, and looking at those and saying, I want this, but I also want to have something for my TV, and I don't want to buy another $30,000, $50,000 pair of speakers and the amps and everything else that goes with it. Boom! I think that this is a pretty attractive price point for those people. It is not for people who are looking for a sound. They were like, I was going to buy a sound bar, but instead I got the LS60s.
Little bit of a price gap there.
That's not how that worked.
It could also be for people who wanted the LS50 Meta wireless speakers, but have a room that's large enough that they need higher output than that.
Yeah.
So, but although for 3 times the price, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see if they sell. Got some comments here from our listener. Karl showed some photos from the THX Ultimate Cinema in Copenhagen, where he's on vacation. The original theater is 60 years old, but has been updated with a twin laser projector setup in Atmos speaker configuration. There are 14 subwoofers across the front stage alone. He's not sure how many more installed up high on the side and back walls. He's pretty sure it's the cleanest cinema he's ever visited. Absolutely spotless as soon as you step inside the entrance from the street. There you go. So if you want to go to a clean cinema, go to Copenhagen. That is
get yourself to Denmark.
Get yourself to Denmark.
That's what you got to
go back. I've been there, and I would go back there in a second. I like that country. Was very, very fun. All right, let's get to the questions. Ryan has a dedicated theater room under construction, but for his living room setup, he's got a Hisense H9G TV with no plans to replace it anytime soon, and he's been using a Yamaha YAS 207 soundbar. He's fed up with that and wants to use a regular 2.1 speaker setup instead. KEF just came out with it.
For a lot of money.
Powered tower speakers might be right up your alley. You could add 2 subwoofers to it. He always has a pair of Triad silver speakers on hand, just sitting around not being used, and he plans to pick up an SVS 3000 Micro for the sub. He's looking at a budget-friendly receiver to power his 2.1 setup. Around $500 would be ideal if possible. And he's fine with getting a refurbished unit, since he's already happy with the refurbished Rants he got from Accessories for Less for his main theater. What do we suggest? You literally could buy the cheapest receiver that Accessories for Less sells, because it's 2 channels.
I suppose.
I mean, it's in an open living room, right?
Yeah, living room setup. I don't know how open or what size we're dealing with
I
exactly.
would assume. Yeah, and I don't know how much difference you're going to get from having really high-end room correction in a compromised single subwoofer, which is certainly not going to be big enough to power a living room to pressurize a living room setup. Anyways, so I would. If there is a specific feature that you want, if there is that, find the receiver that has it at Accessories for Less and buy it. If there's not one, then literally any receiver will do. I just don't see you. I mean, I don't know about these Triad speakers, if they're particularly sensitive or
Triads
hard to
are
drive or anything.
Almost always pretty high sensitivity.
Man,
I've never come across any Triads that are difficult to drive. Quite the opposite.
Then I wouldn't worry about it, and I would just buy the cheapest one. I really would. I know that sounds stupid, but that's I don't see the benefit of having high-end room correction, and that's the reason why I bump up my which models I buy for receivers, because the number of watts isn't going to matter. Number of channels, I mean, they're all going to have at least 2.
Well, on that tip, I wanted to mention, because I mean, of course, there's always the thought of, I really only want 2.1. I don't want 5.1 or 7.1. I have no intention to ever expand to that. So can't I get a 2-channel receiver that's less expensive? And honestly, the answer is no. The less expensive option is the 7.1 AV receiver.
Yeah.
It's kind
of
have
so many unused amplifiers in
Yeah.
that thing, just so many.
But I mean, in terms of you want to hit a budget, ironically, that's the way to do it, is to get the model that is capable of powering a whole lot more speakers than you're going to be using. So I've got two options from Accessories for Less. They are refurbished units for $450, so we're under that $500 budget. And really, there's just a slight trade-off of features. You could either go with Denon's S760H, so that is the brand new model that has 3 HDMI 2.1 ports. You don't need them with your current television, but this would be a bit of future-proofing if you want to do it. But $450 gets you a refurbished Denon S760H with 3 HDMI 2.1 ports. Now, that has regular Odyssey Mult EQ. And as Tom just talked about, he's not particularly worried about what level of Odyssey that you're getting. That will be completely adequate for setting your distance and trim levels of your 2.1 speaker system, which...
I mean, Accu EQ does your distance and trim levels just fine, so Odyssey will be... that any level will be fine.
Now, myself, I've had the experience of running regular Odyssey Mult EQ and coming out of it with results that I actually thought were cause more harm than good. And for that reason, I'm willing to consider going up to Multi-Q XT. I tend to like going for the X series receivers in Denon's lineup, if at all possible. So for $450, the same price, you can, from Accessories for Less, get a refurbished Denon X1600H. So same price, that does get you Multi-Q XT because it's part of the X series. Now, the X1600H has no HDMI 2.1 ports. Like I say, that shouldn't be any problem with your current television. Your current television is HDMI 2.0, has no HDMI 2.1. So if you paired an X1600H with your current Hisense H9G television, you'd be in darn good shape, and that would get you Multi-Q XT. So you know what? Pick your poison, because I don't think there's a bad choice between those two. If you're like, maybe I'll end up replacing the TV before I replace this receiver, so I'll get the S760H for the HDMI 2.1 ports. That's not a bad reasoning at all. So either of those fits. If you've wanted to avoid refurbished, Accessories for Less is actually selling brand new factory fresh X1600H units. They're about the only place you can get them factory fresh, and I think they're very low on stock, but they're selling those for $550, so $100 more than the refurbished version and only $50 more than the budget you said. If for some reason you were like, you know what, I want Multi-Q XT and I want HDMI 2.1 3 ports, Denon's X1700H, the model that came out to replace the X1600H, that has all the things. It goes for $700. At the time that I responded back to Ryan when he first asked this question, it was available at Best Buy, the X1700H, for $700, but now it's out of stock, and it's out of stock everywhere. I can't find it actually available for sale anywhere, the X1700H, and it was $200 over the budget you said anyway. So I think the X1600H or the S760H will absolutely get this job done. And the 2-channel receivers that I could find from Denon and Yamaha and Onkyo were all $600 or more. So
so the only way that you get away with this for cheaper is buying something like one of those Fosse 2-channel amps, and then but that doesn't give you any of the functionality that you need on top of
there's
it.
no...
All that does is give you power to your speakers.
And volume control, I suppose. But
that's it. That's all it does. So I 100% agree with Rob, and I wrote about this too, an article called "Are There Small Receivers?" Because people ask this question all I need is these 2 things. Yeah. I don't need all the rest of it. Can I get just something that has a couple of HDMI inputs and some amps, and that's it? And you're like, no, you got to get all of it, because they're trying... It's what Rob always talks about, rightly, is the economy of scale. They're trying to sell to the most people one product, which means they put everything in it and you use what you want. But because they're only making one product, they can make it for as cheap as possible.
They
Whereas
can order huge
you're asking for
quantities of all the components and churn them out all from the same factory line. Yeah.
That's right. And then promise firmware updates to fix all the stuff that was broken. Infinite Gary, when one of Gary's many setups, he still has a Pioneer Kuro Plasma TV, and the audio is handled by a Lexicon MC12 Pre-Pro, which is old enough that it does not have any HDMI ports. He uses a Canex Pro 4-in, 1-out HDMI switch with optical audio extraction so that he can plug in an Apple TV. One thing he likes is to be able to do is to have a podcast or some music playing on the Apple TV, but then have the video from his cable box showing a baseball game on the Kuro. He is able to do this by starting the podcast or music, then switching the HDMI input on his Kuro to the cable box, and that all works fine. But if he wants to turn the Kuro off and just listen to the audio from the Apple TV, that doesn't work. He has to leave the Kuro turned on just to listen, otherwise Apple TV shuts itself off. Is there a way to use the Apple TV strictly for audio output without needing to have the TV turned on? He won't be replacing his Lexicon MC12 in this setup. This sounds, I mean, if it's turning itself off, it's HDMI CEC, right? And he just needs to turn that off? Is that what's happening here?
It's possible, and I did look up the instructions for how to make sure that HDMI CEC, which they title HDMI control in the Pioneer Kuro.
At least close to what
At least you might figure out what they actually mean. It's not some completely ridiculous trademark name.
AnyNet or whatever.
So I mean, I'll mention that because that's as simple as you press the home menu button, you go to the setup section under the home menu, and under the setup menu you need to go to options, and then there is HDMI control, and there are multiple tick boxes within the HDMI control settings. There are things for power on and power off. There are things for input detection. So, I mean, you kind of just want to turn all of it off in your Pioneer Kuro. You also want to turn off HDMI CEC in your Apple TV. If you do that, that might work. But I was because I don't think I've ever used my Apple TV with a non-HDMI device. I don't think I have any non-HDMI displays. Right. And I mean, I do know that, for example, if I just don't touch my Apple TV for a while, even though I have it set to not turn on its screensaver and not go to sleep, it still does. It still goes to sleep if you just don't interact with it whatsoever for, a few hours or something like that. In his case, it sounds like he turns off the power to his Kuro and the Apple TV turns off. That makes me think it is the HDMI control, that it is the HDMI CEC. And it's not exactly super easy to find in the Pioneer Kuro, and it is on by default. So that wouldn't be surprising to me whatsoever that really is the culprit. But there is the chance that the Apple TV is looking for some kind of HDMI handshake to be happening, and that wouldn't happen just with the Canex Pro, because that is a pretty basic 4-in, 1-out switch. It isn't acting as an actual sync device. It is possible. I can't really confirm or deny that the Apple TV does need to have a display on. So easy enough because it's a setting to try the HDMI control thing. I suspect that might be the case from the way that he wrote the question. But if not, is there a way to just have the Apple TV putting out audio and nothing else if it doesn't detect any sync device? I mean, you could get that Sewell Spider, the 4-in, 2-out matrix switcher, and then connect another little monitor.
Oh God, that's so. It really feels like he should just be using. Well, I don't know.
Well, I mean, leaving the Kuro on, does that really do any harm?
I guess he's worried about burn-in or.
Yeah, well, because I mean, the Apple.
They do dim after a certain number of hours.
Yeah. And I mean, even if it's just showing a blank idle screen.
I would be worried about it. I would definitely want to turn it off. It really feels like the solution here is to not run the audio through this thing and instead get a wireless Bluetooth speaker and use that. And then just when you want to watch the game, turn the game on, mute it, and then put the podcast on through the speaker. Have a
different source other than an HDMI source. Yeah.
That's the way, I mean, that would be my solution. I just he's.
Well, because you could do it with what
you could do is you could get this would actually work. You could go to KEF and get those $7,000 speakers.
Yes, totally reasonable. Especially when he wants
to those.
He wants to keep the Lexicon MC12. That's exactly the solution.
But you don't hook the Lexicon up to the speakers at all.
Oh, okay.
These are just podcast speakers.
Realistically, you could hook an Amazon Echo to your Lexicon MC12 because the Amazon Echo has just a regular 3.5 millimeter stereo analog output. So you could just do this with an Amazon Echo instead of your Apple TV, because your Amazon Echo will absolutely play back podcasts and music from any of the streaming services you might be using on your Apple TV.
I think what we're discovering through this podcast is those KEF speakers are really for everybody. I mean, I think they solve every single problem that we've come across so far.
Yeah, sure.
You see, it's $7,000. It's nothing if it solves all the problems, Rob.
This problem of a Pioneer Kuro TV connecting to an Apple TV
is a very specific problem with a very ubiquitous answer. Jay's dedicated theater room is nearly complete. He shared some early photos of it under construction. He's just awaiting carpet and subs. So... yeah, I don't know what I'm looking at here. Anyways, the room is roughly 13 by 22, fully sealed using double drywall with green glue and a sealed door. So he's under 2,500 cubic feet in air volume. He's going for a 7.2.4 configuration, but with 2 pairs of side surround speakers. So it'll be 13 speakers total and 2 subs. His fronts are Golden Ear Triton reference towers, along with the Golden Ear Super Center reference, Golden Ear Invisa MPX in-wall surrounds and surround backs, plus 4 Invisa in-ceiling speakers to complete the speaker system. They'll all be powered for now by AVRant's SR7010, along with some Outlaw amps. He has 3 Model 2200 mono blocks for the front 3 and a Model 5000. I guess for everything else. The primary front row of seats is only 10 feet from the screen.
These enormous Triton reference tower speakers. Triton.
Is that what those things are that are wrapped up in there?
That is what is covered up while things were under construction. Those are not small. Those are exceedingly deep. They are very narrow in their width.
You're gonna be sitting about, what, 5.5 feet away from the front of those speakers?
Once they're pulled into the room somewhat. Yeah, you really need those monoblocks for those size speakers in this size room from that distance. But we're joking along and laughing because
monoblocks. He could power the whole system with a Fosse amplifier.
No kidding.
And just cross everything over.
We are not
parallel.
We are not laughing at you. We're having a kick out of it because we all enjoy the ridiculousness of this stuff. And I'm pretty sure you're aware you don't actually need.
You must be aware that these speakers are too big for your room.
Yes.
I mean, this can't be news for you. You can't be looking at those and going, should have gone for the bigger ones. Okay. He's not purchased dual subs yet. He's in Canada, so the selection of reasonably priced options is smaller once you factor in shipping from the States for most brands we talk about. It really is sort of SVS or nothing. So he was prepared to go with dual, oh my lord, SVS PB 3000 subs.
For 2,500 cubic feet.
Just think of all the ability to turn the subs down that he'll have, though. He'll have so much ability to turn them down.
He's got fully powered subwoofer drivers in those Triton reference towers as well. I mean, those ones can genuinely hit pretty low because those are big speakers.
But he will be staying in the States for a little while, in a couple of weeks, so he's thinking he could have a pair of subwoofers shipped to him while he was there and then drive them back across the border himself. Good luck making sure that they get there in time. Okay, Number one, I don't know how long you're going to be staying, but it better be like a month because it's going to be a while. The cost savings is a factor, but his real concern is that he has owned individual SVS subs in the past and was 100% satisfied in one setup. He had a PB2000 non-pro, and another setup he had a PC2000 Pro cylinder. He thought both were fine for games and movies, but his opinion is that they sounded a bit big or nothing. And he also thought they were a bit muddled for music. Sounds like a placement issue. In this dedicated theater room, he really wants to be blown away during big action scenes in movies and games, but then also have all the subtlety and fine detail for critical music listening. He's read great things about rhythmic subs, but he's never heard them in person to know for sure. So what's our take? And which subwoofers do we suggest for him? Well, there is no world in which I suggest a PB3000. There's literally no world where I think that's adequate. That sub is the right size sub for your space. That said, I have a feeling that no matter what we say, you're just going to buy the world's biggest sub and throw it in there.
I mean, it's not the world's biggest. It's but more than is necessary for this room size. This sealed.
So if you are going to stick with if you're going to stick with SVS, I would go with the PC 2000s. I think that it gives you, because you need the floor space for your big massive speakers. So and I don't really know how low those things hit, but you could, depending on, I mean, they're not sub 20 hertz though, right? Those Triton towers.
I don't believe so. I'm not actually sure. I didn't look up.
I'm gonna look them up real quick.
Yeah. But I mean, what came to mind for me is that in terms of you would be able to see some cost savings, because that's part of this, is getting some cost savings. Because whether you go with PC 2000 Pros or PB 3000s like you had originally planned, for less money, you could get some monoprice monolith subwoofers. And shipping those into Canada would cost more than if you're able to, get them in the States and bring them across the border yourself. Do be aware they're ridiculously heavy, but, as long as you're willing to put up with that.
They're spec'd down to 12 hertz, but it doesn't tell you what the
plus minus
what
3.
the plus minus is on there. Yeah,
that you're talking about the Triton reference
Triton
towers.
Reference, yes.
The Golden Ear towers themselves. Yeah, I don't know what the minus 3 dB point is. That's probably the minus 10 if they're speccing it like that. But yeah, getting back there, the monoprice monolith subwoofers are certainly an option to consider if cost savings is part of what you want to do. Now, of course, you won't be getting the app. You won't be able to set them up via an app the way you can with the SVS subs. But I would point you output-wise, more than you need would be Monolith's M12 V2. Those go for $800 each on sale right now. Normally they're $900 each, but that's still less expensive than either of the options that were being considered from SVS. So those the M12s, the 12-inch ported subs monoliths, are 115 pounds each. For reference, the PB 3000s are 82.2 pounds.
Yeah,
which is
they're so ridiculously heavy.
Already big and heavy. But I mean, like the PB 3000s that he was considering were $1,600 each. So you can get a pair of the M12 V2s for the same price that you were going to get a PB 3000 for. I mean, that's all in American dollars, but he's considering buying them in the States anyway. So, to me, there are definite cost savings that could be had by going with the monoprice monolith, and that's not chump change. That could be worth your while if you're going to be down in the States anyway. Since it seems like massive overkill is a thing that he enjoys, you could even go for the M15 V2s. Those are on sale right now for $1,380 each, or $1,500 normally, making them still cheaper than the PB 3000s. Those ones are physically even a bit larger than the PB 3000s, although the footprint is kind of roughly the same. But yes, the M15 V2s weigh 133 pounds each, so make sure you have a friend to load them into the back of your, what do you need, minivan to bring these things in? Because I think you're going to struggle even if you had, say, a hatchback, and it's not going to fit into a normal sedan. So, be a little bit wary of how you're going to actually transport these things. But that's where I would point you, monoprice monolith. Then I want to talk about the whole thing that sort of created this idea, right? Because what he was saying about, I owned a PB2000 before, I owned a PC 2000 Pro before, I wasn't really fully satisfied with their sound, and I think the solution is to get a different brand of subwoofer. That's sort of...
I don't know that's going to help you out, buddy.
Yeah, that's sort of where this came from. Now, that's very understandable, that how somebody comes to that line of thinking, but, do we want to dig into that a bit, explaining that, like what he was saying about, gosh, it sounded like this PB2000 sub was like the big explosion or nothing. I'm like, ooh,
that's sitting in a null.
That
for the
sounds
most part.
like a placement problem for sure, or muddled bass. Right now, that sounds like either an issue with integrating them in the crossover region to your front speakers. It could be some of that, or it could be that you had a room resonance that was masking detail. Because,
or you could have had massive tower speakers with subwoofers built in that you were running full range and was messing everything up.
Yeah, like we don't know what his plans are for how he plans to integrate those huge Triton towers, right?
Because our suggestion would be to run them small and cross them over at 80 hertz, which you're going to say, but they have these built-in subwoofers. Okay, so I looked up on Stereophile, has a review of these things with measurements. Not the flattest speakers I've ever seen.
Sure, well, Golden Ears never are.
Never are. And they seem to have a -3 dB point at around 25 to 22 hertz.
Right.
So they do dip very, very low.
I mean,
but they have a
that's
huge
genuine
bass boost.
subwoofer territory for a lot of subwoofers.
Right. So you could theoretically put those two speakers at the front of your room, run them full range or whatever, and then put your other two subs at the back of the room, directly across from them, the same distance into the room as your towers are, and you would then have 4 subwoofers. Now, below 22, 25 hertz, you have 2 subwoofers, not placed very well, but you could theoretically do that. I think
and that would be the setup where you would set your front speakers to large subwoofers on, and then that is the scenario where you would activate the double bass feature or the LFE plus main in the subwoofer output setting. That is the scenario that those settings exist for when you have front speakers that genuinely can play down into the subwoofer territory, and then you're matching them with subwoofers,
otherwise
at the back of the room.
You have a enclosed room that is a rectangle. You set them to small, just like we tell everybody else. You put your subs in diagonally opposite corners or the midpoints of some walls, and you're done. And I believe, just like Rob was saying, the problems you've had with SVS subs is not the SVS subs. It's been either placement or setup or, room modes. There's something else going on.
Yeah, it's such a tough thing to come at, because it's very rare that when someone makes a change in their audio system, they truly limit it to one variable that changed.
Right.
I mean, even if you're not intending to, usually you change something else in the setup at the same time, or you do the whole setup process again, and you might be thinking, oh, this is the same way I did it before, but it very rarely is, or you're listening at a different volume than you were listening before. Like, to actually limit it down to a single variable having changed is, I would say, rare and difficult. You have to be really studious to make sure that that's what you've done. And so often in our minds, it's so much easier to say, well, I swapped this product for this other product. I like the new product better, so that brand is better, or this product at least is better.
Just running Odyssey again can give you a completely, even without changing anything, but running Odyssey again can sometimes, based on how you place the microphone, based on what other noises are going on in your environment, can make a difference. One way, for good or ill. So there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, the other factor, of course, is like you have this memory of having a single PB2000 in one system, a single PC2000 Pro in a different system. If you had went and got some 15-inch rhythmic subs and put them into this brand new room where you've never listened to anything, and you have the two rhythmic subs set up properly, and you go, holy cow, these sound so much better than my memory of my single PB2000 in the other room. Everyone who talked about rhythmic subs being better than SVS, they were right. Like, that is another understandable logical fallacy that happens really, really frequently in, the home theater and audio communities. Because people are relaying things back to their memory of something, or like I say, you've changed multiple variables, but you're only focusing on the one variable and attributing all the changes to that. I changed from SVS to rhythmic and heard this improvement, so that must be the reason, kind of forgetting about all the other things that changed around it at the same time. So what we're getting at is, you go back to that original room where you had the single PB2000, you swap it out for a 15-inch rhythmic, and we're betting that if that 15-inch rhythmic were placed in the same spot that the PB2000 was placed, and that wasn't being played any louder than the PB2000 was, that your experience would have been the same. You wouldn't have actually noticed any difference.
This is the thing. This is the strange thing about subwoofers as compared to speakers. The subwoofers that we recommend on this podcast are all almost interchangeable. Right. They sonically, there are very few differences between these things other than extension and volume. So, some can get louder and some can get lower. So the reason why you recommend one sub over another sub isn't because of how it sounds. So when you say, I want a different sub than the SVS, I'm like, it's all going to sound the same.
Now,
it's just,
to me, getting two of them, two monoliths for the price of one PB3000, that is a very valid reason to change your brand of subwoofer.
Yes. And the other times that other things that we do is like, other than just needing to get more volume because it's a larger space, is form factor. And the reason why we often recommend cylinders is because the footprint is so small.
Exactly.
And that is what is the benefit here. I believe psychologically, this is my belief. I believe psychologically that you are not going to be happy with a ported sub. And I know that's stupid, but I think that that's true. I think that in your mind...
he was looking at a ported sub. He wanted a PP3000.
I know you were.
Yeah.
I know you were. I think you were just doing that for output, but that you don't need. But I think that if you do not go with the mono prices that Rob recommends, which are absolutely the right choice, because once you've set them up, you won't have to move them again, because we know how to set them up properly. I do think that you should not use your towers full range. I think you should use them as,
and we don't know
speakers.
We don't know whether he was or not. Like he's made it very clear he wants dual subwoofers, so he isn't one of the people saying I've got these golden ear towers, they already have subs built in, so I don't want any other subwoofers. But we don't know if his intention was to run them full range or what.
I don't. Yeah. So I would, even though I was the one who said that you could theoretically do it in a 4 sub setup, I think you should run them small, put the subs the way that you normally would. And I would say if you're going to spend extra money on a sub, rather than getting these mono prices, which are good performers and sonically are going to sound just as good as everything else in your room, getting something sealed, I think mentally might make you feel like it's tighter for music, even though there be absolutely no discernible difference if you were to do an A/B test with a ported sub. So I would say if that were the case, then you could look at the sealed subs from SVS would be the option. I guess in that room, I still think the sealed 2000 would be.
I mean, we would say that that's adequate. I'm sure he would want to go SB3000s at a minimum. Yeah, I'm certain of it.
But yeah, I think that would be my only other thing. Okay. I think that I want you to end up being happy at the end of this process. I feel like you're kind of leading yourself through this. I feel like you're a reformed audiophile. If that makes sense. You're like, I've got all these speakers and I still believe they sound great. And, but you were going down that path and then you kind of found us and you're like, wait a second, maybe I don't need all these speakers. Yeah, so I feel like you're coming back the other way, but I think maybe there's still enough audiophile in you that you might believe. And I'm making a lot of assumptions over here. I could be way off base. So that's my alternate recommendation. If those sealed subs really appeal to you, get the SB2000s or 3000s if you can't help yourself.
Alrighty.
So we got Just Jay as our next questioner. Jay has a hypothetical question about speaker characteristics that he would like us to discuss. First, if we were talking about ideal speakers, will we all agree that they would have a perfectly flat frequency response and simply play every signal exactly as sent to it, correct? But he is well aware that there are more facets to a speaker's sound than just its frequency response. Some that came to mind for him are horizontal dispersion, vertical dispersion, sensitivity, maximum power handling, maximum uncompressed peak and sustained output, and the various forms of harmonic distortion. So let's say that you're comparing just a 2.0 or 2.1 configuration versus a fully maxed out 24.1.10 Atmos configuration. Both are in the same properly treated room. Would the exact same speakers be ideal for both setups, or would the ideal 2.0 speakers have different characteristics than the ideal 34.1 speakers, which is what he's saying for the Atmos thing? For example, would wide dispersion be desirable for 2.1 but be... I'm not going to be able to pronounce this word. Superfluous. There it is. For 24.1.10. He'd like us to talk through it. My belief is that a good speaker is a good speaker is a good speaker. There are exceedingly few characteristics of speakers that make them good for one thing and not good for another. I don't think that in most cases. Now, what I think he's getting at here more than anything, because first of all, power handling, output, flat frequency response, all those things, are either make the speaker right for your room or not.
Yeah,
and
room size and distance determine what you need in terms of maximum output. Maximum output then dictates what you need in terms of power handling and sensitivity. All of those things work together to just mathematically tell you in your room size at your seating distance from all of these speakers, that's not going to change. You're going to want to be able to hit the same maximum volume coming out of any given individual speaker, whether it's just a pair up at the front or 34 of them spread out around the room. So that part of it, you'd end up with the same choice of speakers on those parameters, regardless of the number of speakers, because you want to be able to have any individual speaker hit the volume level that you need it to hit at your distance.
Yeah, I really think what he's trying to get at here is dispersion. Is the
I mean, that's the one that mainly came to
dispersion.
Mind.
Yeah, because what the thought here would be if a speaker that has a wide left to right off-axis dispersion, meaning that it creates a field of sound that is very wide, that encompasses an entire couch or whatever, would be great for two-channel, but maybe it somehow gets in the way of the other speakers who, when you've got millions of speakers in here, way that
the way the
make
maximum
a more tight dispersion.
Atmos configuration is basically a speaker every 15 degrees around the entire 360 degree circle.
So, do I think that having a narrow dispersion on a home theater speaker, if we have this many speakers in here, would be beneficial? I think you could make the argument. I think this is hypothetical.
Yeah, it's not as though the processor is like, oh, you've got all these speakers, so I'm going to spread the sound of a given channel into multiple speakers to give you the dispersion. It's still like any individual speaker might be playing any given sound, and you want that sound to be uniform and even across the entire seating area.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that I can understand like the mental gymnastics.
Oh, absolutely.
You went through to say, each speaker should be narrower so that each one doesn't overlap with the other one too much. But I don't think that's the way it works. I don't think that's the way
I also
hear.
come back to what was used to create the content. Because to me, it doesn't make sense to have wildly different characteristics in the speakers you use for playback versus what was used to create the content in the first place. That's where it was mastered. Somebody at some point was listening to this thing while they were making it and making decisions based on what they were hearing in their setup to say, yeah, this is what I want this soundtrack to be. And when you play it back, you want to have a reasonable facsimile of that. So, they're using, M&K speakers, Genelec speakers, something along those lines, which are, guess what? Direct radiating, forward firing, generally wide horizontal dispersion, generally very linear speakers. That's what's going on with what's being used to make it. So to me, on a logical level, it makes sense to use something quite similar to play it back. To my mind, about the only real world difference that I would factor in is form factor. Right? A bunch of the speakers in that 24.1.10 setup necessarily need to be mounted on the ceiling, mounted on the side walls, mounted on the back wall, something like that. And it wouldn't make sense to have tower speakers on your ceiling as your Atmos overheads, whereas you can very reasonably have a pair of tower speakers in your 2.1 configuration. You could also have the very same speakers as long as they have the output capabilities that would be mounted to your ceiling or sidewalls. Those could be your front speakers too. You could have identical speakers all around, and even in your 2.1 setup, those would still function perfectly fine. But it's just I could envision having tower speakers for the 2.1 setup, whereas I wouldn't have tower speakers mounted on my ceiling. That just physically doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But otherwise, I would say the speaker you want to use in every position, regardless of how many speakers you have, I want that wide, even horizontal dispersion so that I get close to the same sound being directed at the entire audience, regardless of where they are. And I want the power handling and sensitivity and maximum output that makes sense for the room size and distance. I'm not coming up with a reason why I would have different facets for 2.1 versus 24.1.10.
No, I can see how there. I guess So I wrote an article a little ways back called "Speakers for Music and Movies Are the Same or Different."
Right.
Okay. And
that comes up all the time.
Well, it does. And the conclusion I come to in that article is the same one we came to here, which is a good speaker is a good speaker is a good speaker. Yep. And what you want is a good speaker for whether or not it's doing music or movies. So I can understand, like, let's take an extreme example. And now can you make Can you make a case for having a different speaker for movies than music? And the answer I think I still come up with is no, you cannot. I don't think so.
I mean, the one to me is if this is a truly dedicated single listener stereo setup, where there's just
electrostatics.
Then you got those electrostatics, which I wouldn't use in the 24.1.10 because I can't imagine having a theater with a 24.1.10 Atmos speaker setup with one listener. That seems incongruous to me that you would have that size of theater.
I want to see you hang some electrostats from your ceiling for Atmos speakers. That's what I want to see.
So I wouldn't go for the super directional speakers because I want to cover an audience in a theater that would have the physical size to incorporate 34 speakers into it. But I could envision a 2-channel setup with one listener who never moves from that one spot. And therefore I could actually envision, I think he was thinking we might have the more narrow dispersion speakers if we have oodles of speakers. I actually end up at the opposite. I might have the narrow dispersion speakers for the 2-channel setup because that's the one that might have a single listener at all times.
I agree with that. And I also say that you can spend $50,000 on electrostatic speakers or $500 on headphones and get a very similar experience.
And in both cases, we would not have the 0.0 setup.
No,
because in both cases, we would have subwoofers, more than one. Placed across the room from each other so that the bass is nice and even and uniform throughout the whole darn room, and then all the speakers, however many of them there might be, they are not dealing with that deep bass that is determined by the room in terms of what you're going to hear at each of the seats. In both cases, the bass is sort of separated from all the other speakers, handled on its own to form that lovely uniform foundation, and then we build however many other speaker channels on top of that.
Okay. Dan says he's been out of the home theater hobby for a while, and now he's trying to catch back up. Hasn't changed that much, my dude. Just HDMI 2.1 was a debacle. That's all you have to know.
Pretty much.
HDMI 2.1 was a debacle.
I mean, maybe all of the HDR stuff, that might all be new to him.
It could be, yeah. So Dan and his wife had their plans in place to construct their empty nester house from the ground up. Then COVID hit, and as we know, the cost of everything went way up, and they were forced to make cuts to stay within budget. The main sacrifice was a fully finished basement, which would have included a dedicated home theater. So they will be using the living room for all of their TV and movie viewing for at least the next few years. He hopes to finish the basement at some point in the future, but for now, we should count on the living room being it. KEF just released some speakers.
That's really not quite what he's going for.
I don't know how you feel about $7,000 for some powered.
It's definitely not what he's going for.
Someone's gonna buy him, Rob.
Oh, I know.
Someone's gonna buy him on our recommendation.
As if we're getting a cut of it or something. We're truly
I know,
not.
Really. Hey, when they make a sale of one of those, if somebody says, I bought these because of AVRant, they're going to remember that because they didn't sell that many,
they're
Rob.
KEF. They're a little bit bigger than that.
Okay, it's a living room, so of course it's open to other parts of the house. It'll be 16 by 20 with high 13-foot ceilings. The left side has a big glass sliding door with a transom above it for structure, and then a wide window above that. The right side has a large opening, almost the entire side, that's open to the hallway and central staircase. The back wall has an open doorway in what will be the rear left corner that goes into the kitchen. They will have a couch and a love seat, sort of a central to the room, central in the room. And most of the time, it'll just be Dan and his wife watching TV, and it'll be about 10 or 11 feet away. So we've got framing, basically.
Yep. It's in the framing stage right now. And yes, I mean, this being the living room, it's open to the whole rest of the house. That's just the way we need to think of it.
Why is there a grid? I don't understand why there's a grid in this thing.
I don't know. They put in a lot of cross bracing.
They certainly did. I don't understand. I've never seen this before.
They must have an insulation plan that requires that or something. Yeah,
I don't know. Do you think maybe those are going to be open shelves or something? I don't know.
I don't believe so. Not from what he described.
Dan would like to have an Atmos setup in this room. He will be using the front speakers that he already owns, which are a pair of older Paradigm Monitor series towers and a matching center. He also has a pair of Paradigm ADP dipole surrounds, but he really doesn't have anywhere to put them. They stick out quite a bit when mounted to the wall, and so his wife doesn't want them on the back wall, and that would the size would be problematic since they'd be way back. Close to the back wall again, and particularly on the left, that would stick out close in to the kitchen doorway. Mm-hmm. So a pair of in-wall speakers in the back wall is what he figures would be best as a compromise. He'd like some guidance on how high and wide apart we think they should be. That's the first question.
Yep.
I have a really hard time looking at this thing without a floor plan.
Okay.
Like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, we've labeled, so we have the front of the room. On the left, there are the windows and the sliding glass doors. Next to those sliding glass doors is the entrance to the kitchen on what will be the rear left corner going into the kitchen there. And then the right side is basically
how far behind him is the back wall is the question.
Well, what did they say the dimensions of the room were? Something close
16 by 20.
Yeah, so about 10 feet from the back of where they'll be sitting, about 9-10 feet behind them.
That's if they're at the 20-foot wing.
Well, he said he'd be about 10-11 feet from the front wall, so
16. So the problem with the back wall, for those of you that aren't looking at the pictures, is that there's an opening.
Yes. Yeah.
So
it would necessarily force them quite narrow together.
Narrow.
Yeah.
Which is how my surround back speakers are. Mm-hmm. I don't love in-wall speakers in this thing. I would prefer, in-wall speakers would be okay, but I really don't want them to be so close together. I want them to be wider.
I mean, my thought is, I don't think you need to do Atmos in this room. This is not the room for Atmos. I would have a pair of in-ceiling surround speakers and be totally fine with doing that.
Okay. If you don't want to do that, okay, which is perfectly fine, I would consider doing either like prime elevation speakers way in the back near the top ceiling, on the back wall there.
Okay, so like above the doorway, maybe?
Above the doorway, yes. So that all the way near the ceiling, or wall mounted, and I still want it above that doorway, so wall mounted and then aimed towards you. Speakers back there if you do want to do wall mounts. I understand wanting to keep that doorway clean. I mean,
isn't that pretty close to in-ceiling surrounds at that point? Like, we're not
the surround apart. If I was putting on in-ceiling surrounds, I would have them like just behind the couch.
That's what I mean.
And so these are going to be 10 feet back.
Yeah.
So that is a little bit different, but those would be my options, and I'm okay with skipping Atmos in here too. I don't really see the benefit all that much.
I mean, you're going to have so much reflection going on in this room, adding kind of unimportant sounds that are originating from above you. Like, it's not going to enhance your experience of the movie in this room. I would focus on a nice, good 5-point. However many subwoofers make sense in here, because again, we're not going to be able to predict what the bass response is in here, and you're open to the whole house, so you're not going to be getting 20 hertz pressurization in this theater. That is out of the question. We are definitely not going to suggest to you that there's any way to enclose this living room. That it goes completely against everything that is planned in here. So, we're going to be looking for, okay, I've got some subwoofers that can deliver some nice bass and rumblies, and then I'm going to have a nice 5.1 setup essentially in here. That's what I would focus on. I'm not worried about Atmos at all. And your surround speakers, we're saying, are going to end up high in either case. So either mount them up high on the back wall so that they can be spread quite far apart, left to right, or put some in-ceiling speakers as your surrounds. And that way they can be closer to your seat, just a little bit behind and to the outside edges of your couch. And I would have a pair of in-ceiling speakers. I think either of those solutions is what I would do for your surrounds.
I can get behind those.
Okay.
He says, what should you do regarding acoustic treatments? You really can't do first reflection points on the side wall, so would treating only the front and back walls be of any value? If so, where? Everywhere? And not just in this space. Yeah. Not just in the theater space, but like anywhere that you can put something to absorb some sound is where you want. And again, I just wrote an article. I wrote it yesterday, so it won't hit the website for a while. But it's this idea that if you have a very wide room, people think, well, the first reflection point is really kind of behind me or next to me, so it doesn't bounce directly to me. So I don't need any treatments on my side walls because my room is so wide. That's not the case.
I mean, there's always a first reflection. It's just going to slightly change the angle of what it is depending on how far away that sidewall is.
Right. And if that sidewall is, making it so that you're off axis to the speaker like by 60 degrees or so, then the output of the speaker is seriously reduced. So you're thinking, okay, well, maybe I don't really. You just need to reduce as many echoes and ringing as possible.
Yeah, in this room, we're not talking about spot treatments and specific reflections. We're just talking about cutting down the overall reverberation time. I don't know what your plan was for the flooring of this room, but the rest of the room, we know we've got these big windows.
It's either going to be tile or hardwood. I guarantee you, there's not going to be carpet in here.
Almost certainly.
No one does carpet anymore.
Even if it were wall-to-wall carpet in here, that's only going to affect the high frequencies. So we basically want you to have as thick as you can tolerate anywhere that you can, including outside of this theater room, because there are going to be reverberations and echoing happening in the rest of your house. I mean, you've got a stairway going up, a stairway going down, an open hallway to everything in the rest of this house, open to the kitchen, and I'm betting that kitchen is not going to be fluffy and absorptive. So, I mean, you're going to have sound just ringing around this entire house, and we want to make sure that you come into this living room and have as padded an experience as you can tolerate. Now, I am going to say, you've got a 13-foot ceiling. Putting something on that ceiling, and I'm talking about maybe we literally put a stretched fabric system across the entire ceiling, and we put 4 or 6 inches of insulation on the underside of your ceiling and then stretch fabric across the whole thing, because visually that's not going to change much, to get whatever fabric you were going to have as the same color as the ceiling was going to be anyway. And we hide a bunch of it up there because I don't think panels on the ceiling is going to look particularly the way that you wanted it to. But, will having treatments on the front and back wall be worthwhile? Yes. Anything, anywhere, any edge, any corner, any wall surface where you're willing to put as thick of absorption as you can, do it, because it's all going to help in just reducing some of the reverberation times. And that's about the best we can say, because getting specific is that we don't need to in here. That's not the problem.
No, you're not like, I think that it needs to be reiterated. When we talk about first reflection points, we're talking about spot treating. We're talking about, we know there's going to be a reflection here. We know it's going to be bad. We know it's going to be detrimental to how things sound in your room. Let's put a panel there. But that doesn't mean if you don't have those spots that we can identify that the rest of the spots are not important. In your case, as much as possible. And, pick a room color and then find a fabric that matches it and then just install some panels. Or find complementary colors, and build your own panels so that they look like, accent walls or accent squares or triangles or whatever. You make them whatever shape you want. So he will install in-ceiling speakers for Atmos. Now, if he listens to us, given the size of the room and the high ceiling height, should he do 2 or 4 speakers up there? You should do 0. Yeah. But if you're going to do them, then I think if you do Rob's suggestion, which is in-ceiling speakers a little bit behind your couch and to the sides, 0 is the right number to have near you. If you do mine, where it's way at the back of the room and then up high, you could do, I don't think you really have the room to make the angles right for, top fronts and top rears. You'd have to go front heights and top middles. If you were going to do 4.
I just don't want him to do Atmos at all.
I'm just telling you what the options are, and the real answer is don't do it.
Yeah.
Save the money, spend it on room treatments.
I do think if you went with my idea, you would end up with 1 pair of speakers in your ceiling, and they would be your surrounds.
Yes. So suggestions for in-ceilings that would work well with his older Paradigm speakers. He'd like to keep the price under $200 a pair if possible, and he'd like to be able to rough them in while the room is still under construction. So Sonos, mono price, what do we say? I think both of those are good options.
Both of those are good options and within your budget.
Yeah. And because you're now going from having, a 7.2.4 to 5.2.
Yeah.
You can spend a little bit more on those surrounds, those in-ceiling surrounds.
I don't think it really needs to be honest.
I don't think so either. Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking that maybe the little bit larger speakers, given he's got this high ceiling and all the cubic feet of air. I actually think like the 8-inch alpha speakers from Monoprice would be a nice choice in here. The 8 inches are the ones that have the metal back cans available, and the metal back cans, which go for $80 a pair, and then the 8-inch alpha speakers go for $120 a pair. So we're at exactly $200 a pair for the complete system. They also come with the metal bracket that you can use either in a T-bar ceiling or as the rough-in bracket. So it's got everything that you asked for the price that you asked for. I think the 8-inch alpha speakers from Monoprice are kind of ideal to use as your in-ceiling surrounds if you go that route, if you do that instead of the high up on the back wall.
So he really had it in mind that he wants an LG OLED. Sitting 10 or 11 feet away, he suspects we'd say to get the 83-inch. If they made a bigger one, we'd suggest that.
I mean, they make a 97, but now we're talking $25,000 or something. We don't know the exact price yet, but around that. Yeah.
But it's nearly $2,000 more than the 77. So could you get away with a 77? Can you move your couch closer?
Or put the 77 on a stand and move the stand closer to the seats? I mean, you can.
Yeah, there's a lot of... You can. My suggestion is to do the math for all the money we saved you in speakers and realize that you're getting pretty close to that $2,000.
Sure.
Already. So do 5.2 or 5.1 even, and use the saved money to get the bigger TV. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah. I mean, I love going with the OLED if you can. I know there are going to be people saying, hey, they've got gigantic windows in here. This certainly looks like a living room that's meant to be bright during the day. And wouldn't it be better to go with an LCD? Like, I don't think any of those people have ever actually used an OLED in real life, because I'm going to tell you a little secret here. First of all, not only are OLEDs plenty bright enough to watch during the day, it really isn't a problem. They actually do a better job of keeping black looking black in sunlight. Because even the Samsungs that have a really good anti-glare screen, the native, like, the TV isn't even powered on, how black does it look? They diffuse the sunlight a little bit more on the Samsung LCDs than the LG OLEDs do. The LG OLEDs, that screen looks black in any circumstance. And that makes the image look better, like, across the board. So I'm in favor of you getting the 83-inch OLED. I agree with Tom. I think we've actually saved you enough money elsewhere that it makes sense to do that. I think going for the larger size is 100% worth it at your seating distance. If this is just about budget and money, hey, I talked about that QN90A. That's down to $2,800 now for the 85-inch size. I just said I think the OLED looks even better, but the cost savings, if that's what it's about, I would rather you get the larger size. So you could get an 85-inch QLED QN90A for $2,800 if you hop on the sale right now.
Any other suggestions we have for the living room space?
I think we've covered that. We didn't talk about subwoofers because he didn't ask about subwoofers. We don't really know, but we did
talk
mention
about seating either. We don't know.
Yeah, well, that seems pretty set. He's got his couch and his love seat, but like, we don't know. We talked about we're not going to be able to predict where the best place is in here. I mean, there's every chance that one subwoofer actually would sound perfectly fine in this space because it's so open and so huge that you're not really going to have the higher frequency standing wave problems that you have in a small sealed room. So I would probably go for a PC 4000 and I'd probably start with just one because that's got the small footprint. It's got the visuals that kind of blend into a corner or an edge somewhere, and it's got enough output that you'll get a nice kick and it will never break itself. So I would kind of suggest that.
All right. They also want to have whole house audio, 9 zones in total, with a pair of in-wall or in-ceiling speakers in each zone. Again, budget is concerned, so we'd like to keep the price around $200 to $300 a pair. He's feeling a bit overwhelmed trying to look at specs and figure out what's important when choosing the speakers. He's heard a demo of Sonance Mag 6 speakers in store, and while they'd be more than fine for Atmos, he felt they didn't sound full enough for stereo music while playing on their own. So would an 8-inch rather than a 6.5-inch in-wall and in-ceiling speakers be better? It seems as though 8-inch models are typically spec'd to play around 5 to 10 hertz lower than their 6.5-inch counterparts. So what's the critical difference? I mean, I think whatever speakers you chose for the the in-ceilings for your surrounds would be the exact same ones I would get everywhere else. It's the same speaker ceiling distance or lower. And I don't think that you are being fair to the in-ceiling speakers that you heard in the store, because you're sitting there critically listening to them and trying to get an idea of how they sound. You are never going to do that with a whole house. You're not going to be lying on your floor.
Well, I mean, chances were, if it's a store demo, first of all, huge space, even bigger than your house.
Right.
And then almost certainly drop tile ceiling, almost certainly without any back cans on them. So it means behind the in-ceiling speakers,
open to the world.
They're just open to the entirety of the warehouse that this store is. So, I mean, it's their worst case scenario and not really the way they're going to perform in here. But that all said, given the price point, given what you want to do, I would just keep going with more of those 8-inch monoprice alpha speakers. I think they're going to work perfectly fine in this scenario. And that's what I would do. If it checks all the boxes.
So does he really need backer boxes on all of them?
Yes.
If this is in your ceiling,
you sure do. For code reasons, you need them.
And it's open to your attic, then the answer is yes. Yeah. If he needs to build anything inside the walls, now's the time. But do backer boxes actually help with sound quality? Yes. Or is it strictly about sound isolation?
Both.
No. Also, they are just cans like caps on the backs of the speakers, or are they fully framed boxes that take up a good portion inside the wall cavity? Well, they can be either.
They can, yeah. For the in-ceilings, it's like it's about the same diameter as the speaker, and it's a metal back can. That is the case for the in-ceilings. If you stick with monoprice Alpha Series in walls in any of the rooms, I mean, first of all, I would kind of lean towards just using the same in-ceiling speakers everywhere because they're very convenient to install, and they have those 8-inch metal back cans, and whatever type of ceiling, it comes with everything you need. So I'm kind of tempted to just say, let's just use the same speakers everywhere. But if for some reason you need the in-wall version, Monoprice does not have a back box that they sell for their rectangular in-wall Alpha Series speakers, but those speakers want 1 cubic foot of air. That's what they basically want for those in-wall speakers, which means if you have standard 16-inch on center, 2x4 construction for your walls, then you want to basically block off a 3-foot tall box inside of there. And that's going to be the appropriate size in terms of internal volume. And that's really all you need to do. You kind of just put a box in there that's 3 feet tall in your 16-inch on center 2x4 stud walls.
I'm going to tell you that your framing, I would talk to your construction guy and say, I need a cubic foot of air behind each one of these holes in this space right here.
If it's the walls. If it's the ceilings, just get the metal backhands.
Well, you may find out how much the metal backhands cost, find out how much it's going to cost him to do this cubic foot of air, and it may be cheaper just to have him do it. Yep. So, just ask the question. But yes, it's about sound. It's about making them sound as good as possible, because having them open to the entire world is not the best way to have these speakers sound good. It's about sound isolation, and it's about code if they're in ceilings. So all those three things together mean, yes, you have to have backer boxes on them. He hasn't settled on how he wants to power all 9 zones. He would really like to stick with Sonos if possible, but getting 9 individual Sonos amps is pricey, almost $6,500 just for those. Yeah. And he's complaining about $2,000 for a TV. Whatever. He's seen that HTD distributed audio systems, they aren't as slick, but it would be about half the price. So do we have any suggestions? I don't. Okay. Distributed amps, we have talked about them, and I have done some research on them, and they do get pricey. The thing I like about distribution amps, rather than, I haven't used Sonos. So Sonos is basically a proprietary, from what I can understand, distribution amp thing. But the thing I like about distribution amps is that you can plug in a number of different sources to them, and even like multiple Chromecasts into them, and then just it allows you to build your zones however you want and have everything playing all at once and have playing only in specific rooms and everything else. So I do like the distribution amps that are out there, especially the ones that have apps that help you set up those zones.
And HTD is one of those. But my feeling is if you really like Sonos, I kind of want you to stick with Sonos because there's a cost to learning a whole new thing and not being completely happy with the interface as well. And if you're like, I already know Sonos and I already like Sonos, I don't really want to steer you away from that. So my thinking is they have a different device that is called the Sonos Port. It has no amplifiers built in, but it's got RCA inputs and RCA outputs, digital output if you want to as well, and it just sits on your network and can feed an AV receiver or an amplifier. And the Sonos Port is drastically overpriced, but it's $450 each versus $700 each for the Sonos amp. Now, the Sonos amp is the same thing as the Sonos Port, but with a pair of Class D amplifiers built into it. Well, I'm like, well, we can get you some much cheaper Class D amplifiers than, an additional $250. In fact, for $75, you can get that Fosse TDA 7498 that we recommend all the time. It's really good. Will it be as clean as just having one device that has the port and the amp built into one box? No, but I don't think you're really planning on seeing these little Sonos devices, So
Right.
You're going to have the Sonos Port, $450, connected to a $75 Fosse amplifier for each room. Now, that's still more in total, but it lets you stay within Sonos for like $2,000 less than getting Sonos amps for every room. So I think that's sort of the compromise that I would go with.
Okay. Carlos. Look at the time last
Got
time.
about half an hour to go.
How important is it to put bass absorbers on the ceiling? How much of a difference would they make? Well, if they're the only ones you have, then they will make a big difference. And if you have treated every other corner in your room, throwing some on the ceiling doesn't do a whole lot compared to
Yeah,
that.
I mean, you can basically
I don't know what you mean by bass absorber, though. I think
Right.
what he means is a panel up there. A bass
Well, I don't
absorber
know.
is like...
He specifically said bass absorber in his email.
I'm just going to say on the ceiling as opposed to in the corners or something like
Sure.
that where you can actually absorb bass. I mean, he's not talking about putting 6 to 8 inch thick panels on his ceiling.
Maybe he is.
I don't think so. I think he just means having panels on your ceiling. I don't value as much as other people do having absorptive panels on your ceiling.
Okay.
Full stop. I think that the aesthetic of having them up there is not worth the sound benefits when you can just put them on the wall and then the wall will take care of most of it anyways. Now I have them on all over my walls. They're everywhere, but there is literally nothing on my ceiling. So in my case, it would deaden the room even more, but I don't think it would do so, like I don't think it would be that beneficial. I think it'd just make it a little bit more dead. Now, if I took everything off... Oops, sorry. I just hit my microphone. If I took everything off my walls and then put it all on my ceiling...
Sure.
Well, then I'd end up with kind of almost in the same spot, except I wouldn't have my first reflections treated anymore. So, I don't know. I just... full stop. Are bass absorbers on the ceiling beneficial? Maybe.
Yeah. It's a very much it depends. Tremendously it depends. So we, both Tom and I, we prefer rooms that are a little more on the dead side than some other people prefer. But we all tend to agree on trying to get about 15 to 30%. Tom and I like to get closer to that 25 to 30%. Some people prefer to be more on the 15% side of things, but somewhere in that range, if you take the total surface area of your room, we want about 15 to 30% of that surface area to be covered in as thick of absorption as you can tolerate. Now, if the only place you can put it is the ceiling, then that's going to count, and we would have it up there. Otherwise, if you've already got like 20-25% of your wall surface covered in 6 to 8 inch thick absorption, then you probably don't need it on your ceiling. Yeah.
And then he asked, what about diffusion on the ceiling? Do we treat our ceilings at all? Well, those are two different questions. We've talked about this multiple times on this podcast. I think that the general view of having diffusion right above your head, which is a common thing that you see people do because somebody did it once and now everybody thinks that that's the way it's supposed to be done. I haven't found that it made a very big difference. Rob has.
Well, I had a very specific problem and nowhere else to put anything. So I did end up with some treatments on my ceiling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't value diffusion full stop. I don't think that I think that for the most part, I think that it's diffusion is a very small benefit compared to the absorption.
Thing. Yes.
Yeah, the absorption is what you really need in your room, and that's what we're almost all lacking. So saying, "Oh, I'm going to have some absorption and some diffusion," no. Any place you were going to put diffusion, put absorption instead, because that's really what you needed. And the diffusion is just something that somebody told you that you need that you don't really need.
Yeah, I mean, to understand what diffusion is, diffusion does not bring treble back into your room. It does not do that. Diffusion reduces the strength of the treble in your room. It takes it down. It does not boost it back up. It does not take it down as much as absorption does, and it is very frequency limited. Diffusion, unless you have insane diffusion panels that none of us are really actually comprehending or talking about, the diffusion that we're talking about only treats a very small range of frequencies, the high frequencies, and it reduces their strength. It does not retain or bring more treble energy back into the room. So if you have a very specific problem where you still have some ringing or zing, or I have this little bit of a clap zing that still happens in my tiny theater. Even with all the panels I put on my walls, I still had this tiny little clap zing that was there. And I'm like, I got nowhere else to put anything. I don't want anything thick. And putting a little bit of diffusion on my ceiling, not directly above my head, on the sort of first reflection part of there, got rid of that last little bit of clap zing. So I'm like, okay, that's all I needed to do. And I put it in a place where I could put it, and it made sense. But it was a very specific problem for a very specific reflection, and diffusion worked on my ceiling. So I'm not going to say there's never an appropriate time for it. It's not all or nothing. We're talking about solving specific issues, and diffusion might do that for you.
Yeah. Okay, dog, you are freaking killing me.
Yes, Doggy is moving around Tom's camera for
Stop
people
it.
who are not watching YouTube.
Hold on, let me fix the camera again. Yeah, I've already fixed it once, but he moved his foot. Felix, stay. Goofball.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Close that and close that. Okay. Luke saw Google's Pixel phone announcements. I missed it. He's interested in the Pixel 6a. Of course, the new models mean the end of built-in headphones jacks. No, that has been gone for quite some time. And he still wants to be able to plug in his existing headphones. He's looked around for a USB to 3.5 millimeter adapters, and it seems as though they're either really expensive, over $150. What? No, they're not. $150 are suspiciously cheap, under $10, with almost nothing in between. He isn't going to pay over $100. I wouldn't either. But do the cheap options work reliably? Are they basically the same as what he would have gotten from a built-in headphone jack? Is there maybe a middle option around $50 that would improve the amplification versus a built-in headphone jack? I will buy the $10 one and sell it to you for $50. That'll make you feel any better. I have used these things. I think I bought the absolute cheapest ones that were out there. Sure. I bought a big pack of them because you lose them like crazy.
You sure do, yeah. They're tiny little dongles.
The people railing against the loss of the headphone jack, I agree with you, but the reason that they have done this is because it makes the phone more water and dust proof. And for whatever reason, the 3.5 millimeter jacks are just like open to the inside of the phone, and it is the reason why they got rid of them, or they're trying to get rid of them, even though people are sometimes asking to get them back. I mean, this is basic technology. Yeah. This is not high end DACs and stuff in here. This is just
the $150 ones claim to be.
Yeah. They're the cheap ones. I feel free to order from Amazon, order the expensive one, order the $10 one. See if you can tell a difference between the two. I'm guessing you will not be able to. And even if you psychologically convince yourself that there is a difference, it's not going to be $140 difference. It's not going to be 1,400 times the price or whatever it is. So yeah, 1,500 times the price. So don't. Just get the cheap ones. They work fine for me.
Right. I mean, honestly, where I would point you, if there's any concerns about compatibility or causing glitches or anything like that, I would just get Google's own little USB-C to 3.5 millimeter dongle. It's $10.
$10.
Like, directly from Google. That's the one I would get. If, the thing you were looking for, I mean, there is Belkin's Rockstar USB-C to 3.5 millimeter dongle adapter that goes for $40. It's almost exactly what we're talking about. They claim It has an improved DAC inside of it if you really, really want to. It also has a pass-through USB-C port so that you can charge it and use your headphones at the same time.
That's what's worth it.
Yeah, unlike the Google one. But if that's what you want to do, is be able to charge it and use your headphones at the same time, Digital Trends actually recommends a brand I've never heard of, Zoomy, which with an X for the zoo part, and double E's, so Zoomy. But they've got one that's like a Hydra thing. You know, it's a USB-C to both a USB-C pass-through and a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack that goes for $19. I'm not sure I totally love that design, but, you know, it would get the job done.
Yeah. Don't overpay for this. No. David wants to get a pair of speakers. You know that KEF has just made some wireless.
I don't think his budget that we're going to talk about quite
$7,000. You don't have to buy a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
It just, you plug it right into your TV, David. He wants to get a pair of speakers and maybe also a subwoofer for his daughter's bedroom. Oh, yeah, maybe not for her bedroom. She streams music from her iPhone, which she could do directly to the KEFs, but also has gotten into vinyl, not so much. Her turntable has a Phono preamp built in, so it can output a line level signal. No need for a dedicated Phono input. It's just hooked up to a Sony Mini CD player with its built-in speakers at the moment, and she likes something much better sounding. The budget is around $500. Don't listen to vinyl if you want something better sounding. But let's
$500, not $7,000.
Yeah, that's whatever. David has an old analog-only Technics receiver on hand. He figures it could power a pair of speakers, although it doesn't have a subwoofer output or any digital connections. But since it's a tiny bedroom, they don't want to take up too much space, and they'd also like to be able to stream from her iPhone through the speakers. So isn't sure how to accomplish all that if they use they use the Technics receiver, which obviously doesn't have anything. Mm-hmm. Maybe a Bluetooth audio adapter or a used Chromecast audio from eBay, which will probably cost more than the receiver that you could have bought. In any case, what do we suggest? And should he attempt to get a pair of speakers and a subwoofer within this budget for this setup? What was his budget? $500?
Yeah.
And he's got nothing at this point. He wants to get a pair of speakers and maybe a sub.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're not getting that for $500, my dude.
I mean, yeah, not that would be really nice quality. And then there's the whole issue of putting a single subwoofer, inexpensive sub, in a very small room, and it's like, I don't know how great the results are going to be from doing that.
Right.
Now, what I thought of, actually not all that dissimilar from those LS60 $7,000 KEF speakers, is I did think self-powered speakers that have Bluetooth built in and can play streaming services on their own if you want to, might actually be a nice solution. And SVS's Prime wireless speakers are on sale right now for $400 a pair. And I'm like, those check a whole lot of boxes, because you said the turntable she's using already is line level. So those could plug right into the RCA jacks of the Prime wireless speakers. The Prime wireless speakers have Bluetooth if you just want to connect that way, or you can use the DTS Play-Fi app and just have them stream music on their own by starting them off through the DTS Play-Fi app. So for $400, I think those are, I mean, I will vouch for them. My parents have them, use them as their primary TV speakers. They are by no means bass shy. They aren't digging right down into subwoofer territory, but for vinyl music, like, I'm really not worried about missing a whole bunch of bass or something playing from those. They don't distort. They're great that way. About the only drawback is they don't have a remote control. If you want to control the volume, you're either turning the knob physically on them, which in a tiny bedroom probably isn't a problem. That Technics receiver probably required you to turn the knob on it too. Or you can use the DTS Play-Fi app and change the volume in there. But that's a little bit more than just an easy remote. So I really like those as a solution. If you wanted to add a subwoofer and kind of be close to this budget, I wouldn't hate Dayton's Sub 1000, the 10-inch subwoofer from Dayton that goes for $150 on Parts Express. That one's a maybe from me, but I would probably start with the speakers by themselves and almost certainly believe that they're going to be enough without adding that sub. The Prime wireless speakers do have a dedicated subwoofer output if you ever do decide to connect one to it. So that's my suggestion primarily. If you're like, no, I just want passive speakers, then I would probably point you to ELAC, their debut 2.0. I'd get the B 5.2s that go for $250 a pair, and you could definitely power those off of your Technics. And you could add the Dayton Sub 1000. The Dayton Sub 1000 has speaker wire inputs in addition to an RCA input. So you don't actually need a dedicated subwoofer output from the AV receiver. You would be relying on the ELAC debut speakers playing full range and then using the crossover that's built into the Dayton sub to try and get the best blend. There wouldn't actually be an active crossover going on because you don't have bass management, but at least you could get the signal to both of them with just speaker wire. So,
all right. So if you're going to go with passive speakers, you could also look at the Fosse. Fosse has what's called a DA2120C. It's a Bluetooth 2-channel amplifier, basically, with a subwoofer output.
Right.
And that's $179 currently. It's 10% off, so I don't know what that makes it. It makes it, I don't know. I guess it was $200 naturally, but it's got you can plug directly into your PC. It's Bluetooth compatible, so you can stream to it via Bluetooth. It's got optical coaxial and left and right RCA in. It's got speaker outputs and a subwoofer out. So this kind of ticks all the boxes that you need. I mean, it's a Class D amp, so it's not gonna. I mean, it should sound fine.
That's for using that instead of the Technics.
Yes, instead of the Technics. Yeah, I don't love keeping the Technics around when you could buy something that you could stream to natively, and then just get the one of the speakers that Rob recommended, and then maybe save up for a subwoofer or do something with that later. But that's sort of where I land on this. But so the speakers are $250, and so that's $3-4. I mean, you'd be $100 over budget if you went with the
ELACs,
the Dayton audio,
the Dayton
and the ELACs
sub,
and
this. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So
what was the thing on that again? There, so we can just write it down as a Fosse.
Oh, I've got the link. I'll put it.
Okay, you'll put the link in. All right, we'll have a link in the show notes. That's what'll happen there.
All right, hold on a second. I have to get that.
But I kind of love the idea of hopping on that Prime Wireless sale because I'm like, it's so clean and easy. So as long
I mean, this is what wireless speakers, self-powered wireless speakers were made for. Was this sort of situation where you have very limited inputs or outputs, and you don't really need a full AV receiver.
No.
This is what that Fosse was really kind of built for. Art bought a used Yamaha RX A2040 receiver off of eBay. Overall, he's happy with it. The Yamaha app turned out to be a pleasant surprise that his family enjoys using. He has noticed that from time to time, the front right and center channels produce a static type noise. If he restarts the receiver, it seems to go away, and it is infrequent but definitely noticeable when it happens. Any idea why this is happening? Stray speaker wire.
Well, then I would be suspecting a shutdown, not just static.
If it gets warm and it starts to bend basically and taps that other wire for a second, you'll get that static, which will release some of the energy that is in there. Then it might cool down and come back. I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't always shut you completely down. You just get some weird staticky noises. That would be the first time. Anytime somebody says I get weird static or my receiver shutting down, check your speaker wire. I would always check the speaker
I definitely agree with that. It's always good to check the speaker wire. This also could be like, how on your AV receiver, once it ages for a while, you turn the volume knob on it and it crackles as you turn the
dirty pot.
Yep. Yeah. I'm thinking like this was used. We don't know how clean it was kept. Giving it a nice thorough cleaning inside and out. We're talking, just compressed air and a vacuum off to the side to catch whatever you blow off with the compressed air. I'm thinking it's something like that where we've just got some dirt, some corrosion, maybe. Probably not even corrosion, probably just some dirt, to be honest, is what's going on with this. Because that's sort of what happens.
Yeah, the compressed air thing is always kind of a good idea. Take the knob off and do that, and then just kind of turn the knob. Like obviously you want things to be off. Just kind of turn the knob back and forth. And while you're spraying it, just to get any sort of dust that's out of there. I mean, the same sort of thing used to happen. I mean, it's been a long time, but I had a car that had the same problem where you would turn the volume knob and it would sometimes go up and sometimes go down, and it would sometimes create static, and it would do all sorts of weird things. So, yeah, that's a good suggestion, Rob.
Okay. So Aras has multiple questions.
I know, we're not doing Aras.
Yeah. We might be able to just do his Like, he's got 2 sections, and just his first is revisiting subwoofers a little bit again. I'm just thinking we're like not quite up to normal time, but we won't go into B and Beyond, which is all about projectors. So we'll save that for next week, but maybe we can just do the first part that Aras says. We got time for that.
All right, Aras. First up, he says he really appreciates our putting his mind at ease about huge subwoofers and concentric drivers compressing. He's also very glad we mentioned the concerns about HVAC. If he were to enclose his future living room, he hadn't fully considered that, and now it will be top of mind as they narrow down their choices while house hunting. Mm-hmm. He still figures that he will end up with an enclosed room of about 2,600 cubic feet one way or the other. He's now on board with going with 4 SVS 2000 Pro series subs rather than dual PB16 Ultras or JTR Captivators. We're going to have to start calling them Aras Overkill. Overkill Aras.
Yep.
He knows we like cylinders, but he really likes to have the grills off and be able to see the drivers moving. Fair enough. Also, his KEF reference speakers have a high gloss finish. He was sort of hoping to get subwoofers that would closely match aesthetically. The PB2000 Pro only come in black ash vinyl. That's not a deal breaker, but it got him to look at the sealed options from SVS, which are available in piano black, and the SB3000 are close in price. So in his room size, would there be a noticeable performance difference, or is there some other option that would be best of all? Yeah, I mean, there's no reason you can't go with a sealed sub in here.
Yeah, 2,600 cubic feet SB3000s, 4 of them, definitely wouldn't have any trouble delivering you 20 hertz pressurization. Yes. So that is absolutely an option from an aesthetic point. And honestly, the SB3000s are physically smaller than the SB2000 or the PB2000 Pros. So in this room size, I'm not against that. In fact, I might be willing to pay a little bit more to get the physically smaller size, because I think that makes a lot of sense in this room, to be honest.
Right.
So I'm not against going for SB3000s at all. Now, Tom and I would tell you 4 SB2000 Pros
would be just fine.
Would be just fine, but I don't think he's going to feel comfortable with that. He had the money to go way beyond
keep talking
this.
We're talking back and back and back from the ledge.
Oh, yes.
Like we're like 2 of us standing in front of him, and he's like running at the ledge full speed, and we're just like, stop, slow down, spend less money.
Hit 115 dB at 20 hertz. Yeah, you might need SB3000s. It's not completely inaccurate. I know, but so if you went SB3000s, I really got no beef with that. I think that's actually a pretty darn reasonable thing to do in this room. I did just want to say, if you want something that is exceedingly similar to the PB2000 Pro, but is available in a gloss black finish, Monoprice now has their Monolith M12 V2 available in piano black. It is quite a bit more expensive than the basic finish, but it is $1,100, which is the same price as the PB2000 Pro in its black ash finish. So if you really just wanted something that's pretty much the equivalent of a PB2000 Pro, but in piano black, the Monolith M12 V2 in piano black is there for basically the exact same price. So that could be an option too.
Yeah, I like the idea of the smaller footprint.
Me
I'm
too.
going to be honest with you. So the SB2000 Pros is that would be my recommendation.
That's what Tom
to
would
you.
get. Yeah.
Tom would only get 2 of them, but yes. Tom would get the cylinders, but I understand wanting aesthetically everything to match. I think that's a perfectly valid reason to want to buy a specific speaker.
Yeah.
And I can't, I mean, people worry about that, like they have to justify their purchase with some sort of sonic thing. It's like, once you've taken all the sonic considerations and you're buying an appropriate speaker, picking a different one that is also appropriate but better matches what you want, no matter what the reason is. This is like, I just like the way this one looks better. I like the shape of the grill. There was those great sounding speakers from RBH a million years ago that had the weird grill that looked like the one
that was kind of shaped. So that
the one that had the weird hourglass shape that everybody looked at it and went, that looks like something my wife uses once a month. and we were like, who let this get through testing? I could see somebody saying, I love the way the speaker sounds. There is no way I'm buying this speaker because of that reason. And that's a perfectly valid reason. because there are other options out there. So yes, if you want to buy a speaker because it is a aesthetically matches better, that's fine. I really don't think you need the 3000s. I think the 2000s are just fine. I think 4 of them are going to destroy this room. You're never going to have them up all the way up at 115 dB, and even if you do, it's going to be plenty loud. It's, you know, you might miss a dB or two, if that, and even then, they're not going to break themselves. You're going to be fine. So I would save the money.
Yeah,
get
but I mean,
4,
you know, he was talking about JTR captivators to get all the way down to SB 3000s. He might have conniptions if we go any smaller. So
I know, if we go any farther, yeah.
I'm very, very okay with that choice. And honestly, if one of the things you enjoy seeing is the driver itself moving, you'll see it moving more with the sealed sub because it has to do all of its output by sheer excursion. It doesn't have any ports helping it out. So there's that.
That's right. And if you get the SB 2000, it has to move even more.
Oh, there's that. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So if you really want to see the driver move, go with the SB2000, not the 3000. The bigger sub won't move as much. See? I got you.
Yeah.
I got you, man. All right. We have Aras left for next week.
We do.
So if you want to get your question answered next week along with Aras, you can email us at question@avrant.com. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Aras for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 143 patrons over at patreon.com.
Yes, indeed. Aras, thank you so much for the PayPal donation. We definitely appreciate the financial support that you've been giving us. And patreon.com/avrant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation if you haven't already done so. 143 people have done so. So thank you so much for being our patrons.
Thank you. We want to thank Jay, Dan, and Art for sending us notes of encouragement and thanking us for keeping the podcast going.
Yes, indeed. The notes of gratitude are appreciated. So Jay, Dan, Art, thank you for those. Thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Antry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.